Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Code 8? Stick around and find out. Digga digga down, bound, digga digga down, bound, digga digga down, bound, 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 digga digga down, bound, digga digga down, bound. That was a good show. Remember that one? Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Code 8. This is a little indie film made in part, well, I think it's maybe made largely by Stephen Amell, the lead actor in the Arrow TV series on CW, and his brother Robbie Amell is also plays the main character in this. This is an indie project of theirs, a passion project that was funded largely on Indiegogo, and is finally being released on streaming services. I watched it on YouTube's streaming service, and let me give you the synopsis first, which on IMDb reads: in a world where people with special abilities are living in poverty, Connor Reed, Robbie Amell, is a powerful young man who is struggling to pay for his ailing mother's medical treatment. To earn money, he joins a lucrative criminal world led by Garrett, Stephen Amell, who works for a drug lord. Sorry, it started with in a world. I just kind of had to go into that. The basic animal we're looking at here is a serious sci-fi crime heisty drama. So it's a world where a bunch of people have, I don't want to say X-Men level powers, but it's kind of like an X-Men type world where people, they're not superheroes. Nobody's dressing in costumes and fighting crime or being supervillains, but people have these super abilities. It's very common. They just seem to be born with them. The world has been this way for decades, like since at least the 1950s. And so the people with superpowers, they don't have like these, none of them have these massive power levels, you know. They are basically, things like super strength, electricity zapping, and the ability to melt things with, or telekinesis or mind reading. It's stuff that largely makes them just much more capable in certain ways, but technology in the decades leading up to this story has caught up with what any of these people are capable of doing, so that a person with superpowers is not necessarily any more dangerous than someone that has a gun or a semi-automatic weapon, so we're not talking about like these really crazy power levels, but even so, the government requires that they it either requires that they be registered or they have to be registered in order to work. There are definitely just some restrictions that have been placed on these types of people, motivated, I think, by the safety of the world, but of course there's a lot of conflict about like what should be done. Is that morally right for us to require such and such things, given that, people with superpowers are now struggling to find work? And so there seems to be a metaphor going on related to, the situations of the underprivileged in American society, but they're not really taking a strong side, because we see those who would represent the underprivileged in this movie, some who are, really just trying to do their best in the world and are suffering arguably from some kind of, bigotry against them. But we also see those with powers that are turning to crime. And then likewise, on the side of law enforcement, we see an example of at least one character who's really trying to do the right thing and not take advantage, of anybody. And then we see another member of law enforcement who is willing to break the rules and bend the rules to plant evidence just to get, some of these criminals caught, and so neither side, the powered or the non-powered, is portrayed as being like good or bad. They're all just people, and so it's a messy situation. There's not really any clear moralizing, in the political sense in that regard. But like I said, it's a largely serious, in fact, completely serious story. I don't remember a single joke that was made ever. Maybe there's one, but I don't know. Much more serious than any CW TV show. I mean, I can, and the DC shows in particular. I can see why Stephen Amell would want to do something like this after the work that he's done in the DC show, which those shows, even though they're going for something serious, it really comes across to me as cheesy, and cheaply produced. And so I can see why he would really want to spearhead and be a part of making a project like this happen, that he could be a part of himself. The characters I could all take seriously, but I had trouble investing in them very much. It's mostly story driven, and for me to really connect with a story and really care about a story, I need to care about the characters and what they care about, what their motives are, and I like interesting motives that are complex. The motives in this movie were very simple. The most complex motive was that of the main character, and everyone else pretty much was straightforward. I don't want to say one-dimensional because that sounds, insulting, but they were they were just very straightforward. There are spurts of action, but the visual effects budget and efforts are also given to dramatic character moments. There's a moment where, like, just out of anger, one of the characters just blasts some, electricity around the room, and I'm like, man, there was maybe some practical effects involved there too. That was a shot that cost time and money, even though it was brief, and they still gave visual effects to that moment, and I really appreciate that. I look to indie projects like this for stories that are willing to go in daring, unusual directions. But unfortunately, I found this story to be very standard, apart from the unique premise, and it had a predictable protagonist arc that likewise made the ending predictable as well. So I was really, at the end of the day, disappointed in what the story had to offer. As far as the performances go, I thought the actors were all solid. And again, I don't want to harp on CW too much, but I think a lot of people are going to come to this movie because they know of Stephen Amell through the Arrow TV series. And I think that, he is much more suited to this kind of film, even though he's playing someone that's very kind of straight, and, just kind of stoic and stuff like that. It works here better than in the CW show, and so, but I would say that none of the actors, even the main protagonist, is not delivering much that's not on the printed page of the script. I'm guessing, but I don't know what notes might be in the script from the writer, but it's not a movie that I would recommend going to if you like performances with a lot of layers and subtext going on. I also look for indie movies to give me really compelling actor performances, really interesting, unusual actor performances. And while these performances I thought were all very solid and certainly better than CW TV show acting seems to be allowed to be, it fell short of really what I wanted from an indie sci-fi movie experience. Now let's talk about the visual effects, because you might be wondering, well, it's indie, how good can the effects be? Well, you may have noticed, as I have in recent years, that visual effects in indie movies are getting better and better all the time, because the technology to produce them in post-production is becoming much more ubiquitous. So I would say the effects here look very good. Better than network television. I watched a little bit of Crisis on Infinite Earths on the CW recently, and the effects in here were much more sparse than the effects in the episodes of those shows that I kind of skimmed through, but they were much more convincing in this little indie project than in that big, network TV show. So closer to the quality of, I would say, like premium television shows, or theatrical release movies in this movie. Somewhere in between those, I would say. A few early shots of the drones that are commonly seen in this movie looked a little fake to my eye, and mostly because they failed to provide scale for, like, how big is this supposed to be? Can you put it up next to a human being for a second? But later shots looked more convincing to my eye. All right, so what about the themes? Is there any thing of moral, philosophical, spiritual significance going on in the themes here that might bring about some worthwhile thought or a conversation? Well, the main character dilemma is that of the protagonist choosing crime in order to pay for his sick mother's medical treatments that she very much needs if she's going to live. This is kind of a classic plot skeleton or plot device, and it does ask that question of whether or not it is ever justifiable to sin or to commit a crime. More specifically, I think we could look at this and say sin. What about sin that's committed in order to save someone's life? Is that okay? Well, I'm not going to give away what the movie seems to say on the subject, because I think that would give away where the end of the plot goes. But from a biblical standpoint, I think the answer to that question is probably no. Now, you could make some arguments from very specific moments in history that are told in Scripture that there are exceptions to that, where you could argue and say, well, what about this situation? Maybe it is justifiable to commit some kind of little sin in order to preserve someone's life. But those arguments are far from airtight. And with eternity in mind, I think this is the big kind of starting point. With eternity in mind, preservation or lengthening of these short lives just can't be considered the ultimate good that we should pursue at all costs. So, I mean, there's food for thought there, but it hangs on a very familiar plot concept, and so it may just go in one ear and out the other because of its over-familiarity, which it, virtually did for me. Now, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, skip this one. Rent it at Redbox maybe, or watch it when it's on a streaming service that you already pay for. Don't go out of your way to see this one. It's interesting at times, but you're ultimately going to find it to be very forgettable. All right, there's no MPAA rating for this one, but I would describe it as equivalent to an R-rated experience for language and violence with some brief sexual subject matter and blurry background nudity. All right, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected to what we're doing, or share this content with others. I'd really appreciate that. And I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. You can get more information on the benefits of being an insider at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Then I hope you'll join us soon over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.